In today's episode, I will be talking to Lori Saitz on how to do corporate networking properly and what's the best strategy to have. We also will look at how to make more meaningful conversations with others and how to follow up properly. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Today, our guest is Lori Saitz. Hi, Lori.
Hello.
How are you today, Lori?
I'm doing well, thanks. I am so excited to be talking with you today.
Cool, me too. So, for the listeners, tell us about you.
Tell us about me. I have a background in marketing and corporate communications and broadcasting. And when I started my first business in 2003 and ran that for 11 years, and then I took a couple of years to do some marketing consulting, and then I started this, which I'm sure we'll get into, is helping managers make sure that their employees know how to network effectively at conferences.
Now that is interesting because I've seen corporate people network and it's scary.
Yeah, it can be amusing if you're standing on the sidelines watching.
But then again, I was that person at some point. So.
Well, and so was I, which is how I got into doing this, right? So
tell me about that. So is there like a process or just a mindset?
Both. So when I started that first business, I needed to go to events and conferences and find clients and find people who could send me referrals and perhaps strategic partners. Mm-hmm. And I was, first of all, backing up, I was always the kid in school whose report card said, Lori is very bright, but she needs to learn how to speak up in class. And at home, they couldn't shut me up. But when I was around people I didn't know, I didn't have anything to say because I didn't know what to say. And I didn't want to say something wrong and embarrass myself or have people think I was an idiot. So it was very uncomfortable for me as a new business owner to walk into a room at an event and see all of these people who looked like they already knew each other. And I didn't know anyone. And now I had to figure out how to break into a conversation and how to talk to them. It was very uncomfortable, but I had to force myself to do it because I wanted my business to be successful. So it was somewhat of a mindset, helping myself figure out how to feel comfortable. And then it was also some strategy. What are the actual steps you can take? And those things go hand in hand because when you know what to do, you can feel more comfortable doing it. And so then you aren't as anxious.
That makes a lot of sense. So what's the strategy that you would use?
So I now look at networking as having three parts. So you have what do you do before you get to an event? What do you do once you're at the event? And how do you manage the follow-up after an event? And so I look at it, breaking it down into those three parts. So it's really not only what happens when you're standing there in that room, looking around and seeing all those people.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So if you can prepare yourself ahead of time, for example, one of the things I recommend is, can you find out who else might be there? Is there an attendee list to look at and see, oh, I want to meet this person and that person. So now you're going with a purpose. And you walk into the room looking for someone specific, as opposed to just feeling like you're a lost
puppy.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's one of the things you could do, is find out, is there someone specific that you would want to meet? And then the other big piece of what to do before you go to an event is, okay, so you know the question. What's the question you always get asked when you go to an event?
What is it that you do?
Yes. It's the most awful question that you could possibly ask, because it doesn't tell you anything. But somehow we have universally been trained to ask this question. So I when I work with people, I give them better questions. We come up with better questions to ask. But if people don't know what those better questions are, you're going to get that question, right?
Yes.
So wouldn't it be in your best interest to have a good answer, instead of, again, with the animal analogies, being caught like a deer in headlights and stumbling through an answer to that question? And what I found is that most people will answer that question with their title.
Yes, I was just thinking.
And that doesn't even answer the question.
Because it can mean so many different things depending on the company, isn't it?
Sure. But it's not a satisfying answer. And
no.
So, right. So going back to, if you can prepare yourself before you get to an event for how you want to respond to that question, that helps you feel more comfortable once you get it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what do you do at the networking event?
Yeah. So again, in terms of researching who else would be there and who, because you really want to go into this with a strategy and a purpose. And so I recommend setting goals. Is it, I want to meet 3 new people? Is it, I want to meet a specific person from a specific company? It's setting yourself up for success, really. And so again, if you aren't able to research, because then there are also a lot of organizations that don't publish a list ahead of time for security and privacy reasons. Mm-hmm. Once you get there, oftentimes they have name tags, name badges, and they're spread out over a table. So if you could get there early and see who else is going to be there and look at the name tags, again, it could help you decide who you want to find and talk to. Now, if you aren't able to do that, or you look over it and you're still not sure who you want to talk to, if it's, for an example, if it's a lunch or a breakfast and you're sitting at a table with a bunch of people and there's a speaker, you could look around the table and quickly research online, on your phone, who else is sitting at your table. And maybe there's something in the news about them. Now, I don't mean like scandalously in the news, although you never know. But I'm thinking of a story I heard from a friend, and she had gone to a lunch and was doing exactly that. And she found out that somebody else who was sitting at her table was the CEO of a company that had just received $1 million contract. And so after the speaker was finished, she went up and congratulated him on that accomplishment, and they started a conversation. And she was in banking, and she eventually earned his business because she had done her research while she was sitting there and was able to start a conversation with him about something that was timely. Yeah. So that's one way to help yourself at an event. And then there's the breaking into a conversation, which we touched on at the beginning here. And how do you do that? How do you walk up to people who are already talking and help yourself into the conversation?
So do you teach about body language and what's an open, an open 3 and stuff like that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, that's exactly it. At looking at who is open to a conversation. And then a lot of times too, and there are people who are standing alone. And those are the people who are like I used to be, and who many of the people I work with have been that person. And so they are more likely to notice that person standing alone.
Yeah.
Because they have been that person. And so to go up to that person and start a conversation is another tactic that I teach. That then you're helping both you and the other person feel comfortable and get into a conversation.
Okay. You said the last stage was follow-up. So
yes,
that sounds like an easy thing to do.
Yeah, you say it's easy. And even the people who are very adept at networking, and I want to go back to that networking, what networking is in a minute, but even people who are very good at managing at an event are not necessarily very good at the follow-up. So you're right, it is easy, but it's not, it's simple, but it's not always done, because you go back to your office after an event, a conference, maybe a 3-day conference, even a one evening event, and you're inundated with emails and phone calls and putting out fires, and those business cards that you collected get put on the side, and you look at them and you say, oh yeah, I'm going to follow up with those people on Friday. And then Friday comes and goes, and you look at them the next week and you go, oh yeah, I'm going to do that tomorrow. And weeks go by and no follow-up is ever done. Yeah. And then what was the point of going to the event other than you had a couple hours perhaps of enjoyment in talking to people? But you're really leaving money on the table by not doing the follow-up. And so one of the things I recommend to make sure that you get to the follow-up is when you schedule an event in your calendar, in your schedule, at the very same time you put that event in your schedule, put the follow-up. Schedule some time for the follow-up. 30 minutes or an hour, however much you think you'll need, depending on how long the event is. And then do not let anything get in the way of doing that follow-up.
You know what strikes me from what you're saying in terms of corporates out networking is that it seems to have a very different approach to business owners and contractors networking. Because it sounds to me that a lot of kind of companies are actually more hunters when they're networking, and business owners and freelancers are more farming. So looking to build relationships, build stories. Where I notice that if you go to a mixed event where you've got freelancers and employed people and they're networking, the employed people either don't say anything because they didn't really want to be there in the first place, but they had to be. Sure. Or if they are there, then it's kind of like, here's my card, here's my card, here's my card, here's my card. And then that's like done. That's the networking over. You know? Yeah.
Well, see that's the interesting thing I wanted to come back to and address what exactly is networking anyway. And it really, a lot of people are apprehensive about going to events and they don't like them because they have a misconception about what networking truly is.
Yeah. And
what you're saying is about corporate people, that's not networking. That is, I don't know what that is, but to
be fair, it's not just
I know,
but it's often if you're a business owner or a freelancer and you have only been doing that for say under a year, then you'll have the same kind of here's my card, here's my card, here's my card.
Sure. In fact, I say it's more important to get the other person's card than it is to hand out your own, because then you are again in control of the follow-up.
Yeah.
So few people do it. So if you're handing out your card and you're expecting the person you gave it to follow up with you, you're going to be waiting a long time.
Yeah, I must admit, I don't give out business cards unless somebody's actually asked for it.
Yeah.
Or I'll say, would you like a card? You know, if I feel like I'm up to
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, part of it is our data protection, GDPR, where, you know, you have to have permission to contact people and things like that. And I just find it, and I don't see there's any point in, even if it was allowable, to contact people who don't want to speak to you. So I was only like, so if I give my card to somebody or I take their card, it's because there will be contact between us. So, you know, so I'd rather go to a networking event and not exchange cards, or only exchange 2 or 3 if those 2 and 3 are meaningful.
Sure. Right. And that's a really good point, because that is, networking is about establishing a relationship.
Yeah.
It's really just the basis of it. You're deciding, do I want to continue having a conversation with this person, and then build a relationship from there. And so the point of it is not to hand out your card to everyone there and have a conversation with everyone there. It's to find a few people and have a meaningful conversation that you can then build on over time.
Yeah.
And so, having a conversation with 2 or 3 people that is more significant, more meaningful, more substantial, is far better than handing out your card to everyone.
So once that you've had that mutual exchange of cards, say, and you've got on had a reasonable conversation, how do you build that into something more meaningful?
This is why it's so important to have a more meaningful conversation and to ask better questions at an event so that you have something to follow up on. So if you're just having a conversation, oh, what do you do? And the person says, oh, I'm a financial planner, or I sell real estate, you don't have anything to follow up with later, unless rarely you have something to follow up on. But if you can get into a more interesting conversation, and one of the best questions I love to ask people is not what do you do, but what are you excited about working on right now? And they can answer that in a million different ways. And it maybe is business focused, or maybe they're really excited that they're working on refinishing a dining table. I don't know. But it helps you connect with them on a more personal level, because business is business, but business is done between people. It's, you talk about business to consumer or business to business, but it's really human to human all the time. And so can you establish a conversation and find a commonality that gets the other person to be excited to be talking to you, and then you have something to follow up with. Yeah. So if they start telling you about a project at work that they're really excited to be working on, then you can follow up and say, hey, how's that project going? Or I found this resource that might be interesting to you. Or I know somebody that might be a good connection for you in regards to this project, whatever. Again, it gives you something that you can reach out and follow up with.
That makes sense. In your business, do you have more sales teams, or do you have all types of individuals wanting to network better?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do work with sales teams, and I've also worked with several tech IT teams, because they do go to conferences and they tend to, stereotypically they're not great at socializing, but I think that is a lot of stereotype. But again, it comes back to, they just don't know. Salespeople are more often given some training on selling, but not necessarily on networking. Networking is an interesting thing because you don't learn how to do it in school. And so a lot of, especially new hires coming into companies, don't know how to network. And networking is something, sure, that you're going to go out and do, but it's also a skill you need to have if you are making connections within your organization.
Yes, because I'm just wondering that if your job isn't sales, but you work in an organisation and say there's the conference and you're on the stand or something like that. Often what I see is in those environments that corporate employees aren't networking. They're chatting, they aren't networking. And I wonder if it's because there's an assumption by the leader that they will network, but they don't. But they think they're there to man the stand or
right
the manager, but they don't see it as their role. And then if you're an extroverted person, as soon as you get bored, you'll start to with people anyway. But if you're introverted or maybe disengaged with your company, they might not say there's any point to networking because that's not their day job. Their day job is to, I don't know, be the accountant or work in the department. So I'm just wondering if that's why, there seems to be a disconnect, that I see a disconnect between corporate employees and freelancers when they go networking. Because freelancers are doing it because if they don't do it, they don't eat.
Right. Yes.
Employees are doing it because they're told they have to go there.
Sure. And what they don't understand is the importance of networking regardless of what your job is, because you can still bring connections into your organization that are valuable.
Yeah.
So for example, an accountant or an IT person could be at a conference and they could be strategically networking with people who could do a couple of things for them or with them. One is they could offer resources. So exposing them to any kind of resource, a new book, a new program, something that could help them in their job or help their department do their jobs better. They could be exposed to people who could become new employees. So, for example, if they're working in a tech department and the department needs to hire someone, those employees could say, "Oh, I met so-and-so at a conference. That might be the right person," and help bring in new employees to the organization and save, it costs a lot of money to find new people to recruit. So they could be saving the organization money by bringing in new hires. They may be just, again, going back to the resources. So maybe within that department, they're having a challenge and they don't know how to solve it. But somebody who was at a conference could say, "Oh, I met this person. Let me call them and see if their organization has faced a similar challenge, and maybe they can offer some suggestions."
No, that makes sense. So it's about narrative then. It's about making sure people understand the purpose.
Yeah, it's not always about finding new clients.
Yeah.
It's about finding new connections and making new connections. And then the other thing I just want to say too is that from an employee standpoint, especially in today's world, you are not likely to be at that organization for your entire career. And when the time comes that you need to move, whether by your choice or you're not your choice, if you do not have a strong network, you are not going to have access to new opportunities.
Yes. And I think that but the other side effects of corporate networking is that by making new connections, you're securing yourself if you get made redundant or you end up having to leave a company, because there are more people who know you and what you can do.
Correct. So it's in your best interest to build and have and maintain a strong network.
Okay. So I suppose the final thing we need to talk about then is, now that you've got these people there, or you're in the same room with them, how do you get them to talk to you?
In the room or after the event?
Oh, good. Both.
Okay. Well, when you're in the room with them and you've decided these are the people I want to talk to, walking up, and again, like we mentioned earlier, reading the body language, are they open to having a conversation with you? And introducing yourself. So the thing to think about is everybody feels like they're the only one who doesn't know somebody, or that they're the only one who feels awkward there. And the truth is, almost everybody feels that way, even if it doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
So if you just walk up to somebody that you want to meet and stick out your hand and introduce yourself and shake their hand and say, and start a conversation from there, almost everyone is open to having that conversation. So, so it's a little bit overcoming that fear. And there are a couple of things that somebody can do to feel more comfortable. I mentioned Amy Cuddy, who is she's a researcher. She has a TED Talk, and it's Amy Cuddy, Cuddy, and she talks about the power pose. And there is actually physiological science behind how it works.
Yes.
In making yourself feel more powerful. So there's that. And then I actually have recorded a meditation, 5-minute meditation that someone could do before walking into an event to help feel grounded and calm. Mm-hmm. And so those two things could help before you walk in and give you a little more confidence to walk up to somebody and say, nice to meet you. I've been wanting to talk to you.
Okay. So what about afterwards then? So everyone's gone home. Yeah. And maybe you phone them a couple of times and they haven't responded. Do you just stop or should you continue?
Great question. Persistence. A lot of times people call once or twice and feel like they're being a pest.
Yeah.
So I recommend phone calls are great, but hardly anybody answers their phone anymore.
True.
But that wouldn't deter me. I would still do it. And emails. And again, people get hundreds of emails every day. And so it really is about being persistent. Until the person says, stop contacting me, I would continue to reach out if it's somebody that you really do want to maintain a connection with. And sending a LinkedIn request I recommend that is one of the first things to do after you meet somebody at an event, is send in that LinkedIn request, because then you can follow what they're posting or they can follow what you're posting. If you can engage and comment on their posts, that's a way to maintain a conversation. Even if you're not actually having a conversation, you're still engaging with them. Mm-hmm. And, I find one of the things I've always loved and still love even more now is actually post mail. Send something, because so few people do that anymore. Everything's online. So take it offline and send a handwritten note.
Yeah, in some respects, that's almost more scary than voting.
Really?
Well, I suppose it's kind of, that's that long wait, isn't it? Then it's kind of, did they get that? Maybe they didn't reply.
Yeah.
It's like that awkward. I suppose if you email something, it's done and they received it.
Well, sure, but if you're not getting a response.
Yeah.
And it could be a combination of all of those things. But the point I want to make is that people are so distracted. And so contacting somebody once or twice or 3 times may not be enough. You might have to do it 9 or 10 times. And I've had the experience where after so many attempts of being persistent, I will finally get in touch with somebody and they will thank me for being persistent, because they wanted to get in touch. They wanted to have a conversation, but they were just so busy. And they kept seeing the email and they kept meaning to respond, but then it got buried in other emails. And so if you are the one who's persistent, then you're going to win at this.
Yeah. So I guess it's a case of being consistent and persistent.
Yes, exactly.
Brilliant. So I think that's probably a good place to end. Do you have one top tip for the listeners?
One top tip. We went through a lot. I would just say the one thing about name tags, we didn't talk about name tags. Yeah. I find people don't know where to put them, and they go on the right side of the body. Mm-hmm. Because when you shake hands, your body turns, and then you say your name and they see your name on your name tag. There's something that comes up. It seems funny, but it comes up all the time. So just remembering to put your name tag on the right side. So the right side is the right side. Yeah. But I see them all over the place. You especially don't want it on your belt buckle because we don't want to be looking there either.
No, we don't need to explain that one. Brilliant. That's great. So thanks for the great conversation. Would you come back again with another subject?
My pleasure. Yes. Thank you for having me, Jude.
No, brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Lori as much as I enjoyed having it. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.